Again, we're so excited to have Deborah and Noah on today to share some of their National Drought Mitigation Center tools and COCORAS tools with us. And so the goal for today is to learn a little bit about some visualizations that you or your patrons might make to help you understand precipitation, drought, and environmental conditions in your place. So there's some easy to use data and harder to use data, and so we've tried to select some tools for your place. I've got my team here next to me in the Education Research Lab, and Dr. Aceto is also joining us. Anytime if you have any questions, please send us a message and check out the website. Today's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about some local maps and visualizations that you could create. First, we'll start with COCORAS and NOAA. They have a brand new COCORAS map I'm excited to see, and the National Drought Mitigation Center has several tools, the Drought Impact Reporter and the Drought Atlas. And then I'll share some basic tools for showing average rainfall and climate trends similar to the ones that Deborah showed us last time about about normals and annuals. All of these tools will have links in the webpage as we go, but we've tried to collect them on this website, so spottyrain.org/local report, and you should be able to follow along on that page. Let's see, and access the tools that we're working with today. And you can also see that we've added tutorials and reference information so that when you return to it later, if you have more questions, those resources are easily accessible to you. I'm glad to have you here today, and I thought let's just hand it over to COCORAS. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. There are some questions. I love the feedback and questions that we got from you guys about your interest in drought and experiences in your place. One question was, is Iowa eligible? And of course Iowa is eligible. We spent all this time talking with you at your state library association. Also, any libraries, small libraries or libraries serving rural populations in the Great Plains states. So we've targeted Colorado, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and expanded the call to the other 7 traditional Great Plains states in Iowa. We're really looking for, at the end of the day, someone to host a program related to citizen science, to volunteer monitoring using the COCORAS program, and to install a rain gauge, be a physical monitoring site at your library, or at the very least, display information about the project. And so as we will have a lot more information in the final webinar about programming ideas and about the mini grant itself. So I appreciate you following along. And now I'll send it over to Noah, and he can talk a little bit about some of the cool COCORAS tools. So after you become a volunteer, looking at your information or information in the area around you.
All right, thank you guys very much. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen once I've been given permission to do so. There we go.
Sorry, I thought
nope,
you
no
could override
problem.
me.
That's fine. So I'll just start out confirming that you can see the COCORAS homepage before I start my actual presentation. And just to let you know, what I'm referring to oftentimes on our map, for our maps, you can access them through this link at the top of the page here that says Maps. But I'll go ahead and get my presentation started, and here we are. So hopefully you guys are seeing the proper slide with not in presentation mode, but the actual slide. So our outline today, I'm gonna show you about looking at rainfall maps, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about looking at the condition monitoring maps. But then I want to talk a little bit about what is quote unquote normal, and that can change depending on where you are, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I'm going to show you guys a tool to be able to kind of understand what's normal for you through what's called the Standardized Precipitation Index. So we'll go through all those things. To begin with, as I mentioned, from the home page, if you clicked on the word maps at the top of the page, you would have options to view all these different ways of more or less viewing some of the same sort of data. We've got our old classic map, and then we've got what we're calling our new map. But I'll be honest with you, this thing is about ready to get replaced, and I'll show that to you in a second. There's also the condition monitoring map. I'll show that in a moment. And then finally, I'm not going to talk about it, but we do have a way of mapping precipitation data by watershed. So that's another option for you through that page. But special just for libraries, just for those of you who are on here today, because we have not yet released this map to the public, but it will be available soon. And so if you went to maps.kokoraz.org, you would see our brand new map. And this is a really powerful map. You're able to zoom and pan just on it, just as you would any sort of Google type of map. But the extra exciting thing about this map, we're really excited, is one of the options is now that you can look at accumulated data. So just to more or less explain, all of our maps prior to this one, you could only look at one day at a time. You can see how much it rained yesterday, or pick a random date in the past and you can see the map for that particular day. Now with this new map, you've got the ability to customize your start and end date and see how much has been reported over the last 7 days, 30 days, or just your own customized start and end date. So we're really excited about it, and I'm offering it to you guys now as a tool that you can actually access, but special because we have not released it to the public yet. Moving forward, though, on that maps page that I explained at the beginning, one of the options is to view our condition monitoring maps. This is kind of a blurred out version, but if you click on it, you would immediately pop up what is today's map. And so this, I actually pulled this up yesterday, but we can see all the reports for an entire week superimposed over a map that actually has the current drought lines added. So we can see the D0, D1, D2, and D3, etc. The nice part about this map, very similar to our new map, is that you can zoom in, you can pan around, you can click on any dot. And as we look at these dots, they're more like triangles and circles, but any of them that are pointing down is someone who is reporting something drier than normal. The round ones are near normal, and then anything pointing up is wetter than normal. And so it's just a real nice snapshot. You can see people all over the country reporting their conditions. And I'll give you a screenshot. If you zoomed in, I've got this one station here that's south of Dodge City, and they've reported moderately dry as their category. And if you clicked on their triangle, you'd actually see what they reported. And this is, again, something that we're encouraging you as a library. If you join Kokoraz, you could submit one of these reports, and these data are used by the National Drought Mitigation Center when assessing drought and drawing some of these lines. But we can see here this person, real nice. They've reported 47 reports in the last 12 months. So this gives some confidence to the people looking at their report that this person has been doing this for quite a while. They're reporting how much they got. They're talking about the tree leaves froze. The wheat has gone backwards. So it's a fantastic way for you to be able to just give a narrative of what you're seeing on the ground and helping out the drought scientists. So moving forward, and going back to this guy said 2.49 inches of rain in the last 2 months, and that's about half of our average moisture. Well, how did they know what is their expected amount for the month? And that's really the big question, is what is normal? What's normal for me in Fort Collins, Colorado, is not going to be normal for you wherever you might be. So when we talk about normals, what we're talking about is a long-term average. If you took your data every single day and over a long period of time, preferably 30 years worth of data, now you can start to have an idea of what we can consider normal. But as I just explained, what is normal for you is not going to be normal for anyone else that is even, several miles away from you. It's going to be different. And so I want to give you some tools on figuring out what is normal for you. And one of those tools is a group that we work with out of Oregon State University called the PRISM Climate Group. And these guys model normal data. So they're taking in data from all over the country. They're doing precipitation and temperature, but they're doing major computations to figure out what is normal for different regions. And if you went to their website, this is totally open to the public. Anyone can go here. And you can look at the broad region of the United States, and really even you can click in and see your state and see different areas of what is considered the average annual precipitation. And it's quite interesting. The map is quite clear that it's almost like an elevation map. The higher you go in elevation, the more precipitation you're going to get. At least that's the case anywhere west of the Mississippi. But this is a nice tool, and you can basically look at your area and determine how much precipitation is quote unquote normal for your area. But this is really broad, and as I mentioned, and as we've talked about throughout these webinars, precipitation is so variable. It can be raining across the street and not on you. And so I want to offer you guys a tool that is special just for COCORA's observers. And so if you're registered, if you're a library that's registered with COCORA's, you've got extra special access to a tool that will give you your normal for your exact location, your exact latitude and longitude pinpoint. I'll preface and say that this is modeled data. They don't have a weather station at your pinpoint, so how can they collect 30 years of data? Well, they're doing some extrapolating based on all the data that they've got available to them. But once you're logged in, if you click on My Account, your information will pop up, and you can click on Prism data next to your station. And what you'll end up having is a neat graph that gives you your expected monthly precipitation amounts at your exact location. And so here's my site here in Fort Collins, and this is just this is a screenshot, but if this were live, you could hover your mouse and see the actual values. But just as an example, what if I'm here and let's just say it's July, and I've got an inch of precipitation throughout the month of July, and I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, it seems so dry, and so I can go to here and I can look and notice that, well, it's really looks like about 1.3, 1.4 is really all the average for July. So if I'm already at an inch, that's not that bad. Now, of course, if I were just at an inch in May, now I could say, wow, I'm really at a deficit for what I'd be expecting in May. So this is a really good tool for you to be able to figure out what is quote unquote normal for your actual area. And again, this is not available to the public. This is something that you need to be registered as a COCORA's observer to be able to get these data. So I'm going to end with a final tool, and it's called the Standardized Precipitation Index. And it's a way for you to determine, again, how normal your precipitation has been over any given set of dates that you want to view. I do want to say, though, that this is not a tool that you should just use all by itself and say, this says that I'm in D4. I am in bad drought. There are way more things that go into figuring out drought, possibly reservoirs nearby or the soil moisture. So there's a lot more that goes into figuring out drought. But this is a fantastic tool for viewing how normal you are over the last, let's say, 30 days or 60 days or up to even 6, 9, or 12 months. And so here is the map, and the link is here, and of course we've got the link on the website that Nicole mentioned earlier, so you don't have to scribble and write this down. But even as you look at this map, and we're looking at the last, so it's a 30-day look, and each and every dot is basically you're comparing each dot is only being compared to itself. So I will advance a little further and show you that similar, you can zoom in, you can pan around, and I've zoomed in here and I hovered my mouse over Dodge City. And we're looking at the last 30 days, and what I want to make sure that you realize is that we're not really looking, this is not inches of precipitation. This is not a number that you really need to worry about as far as how much rainfall you've gotten, but the color does equate to a percentile ranking that we've adjusted to match the colors of the drought indices. And so we can see that over the last 30 days, this station is in the 10th to 20th percentile of normal. You can see some of these red dots. They might be a little bit drier. But as I mentioned with my caveat ahead of time, if you're living here and this dot is red, you can't just raise your hand and say, I am in a D3 drought, because there's potentially more into it. So once in a while, I'll back up. Once in a while, you'll have a dot sticking out of nowhere, and as we look closer into it, it turns out that there's some missing data, for instance. And so that's something to keep in mind, that it's not a perfect analysis, but it is a nice snapshot. And even here, as we look at the entire country, you can see who's been drier than normal and who's been wetter than normal, and you can click on these different time frames to see how, again, normal your dot is compared to what you're expecting for average. The last thing that I'll say, we've got one more link on the SpottyRain website that we've linked to a tutorial, and it's more for CocoRa's data, but it's a way for you to find stations in your area that have complete data. One of the worst parts of trying to figure out drought is looking at a station and then realizing that, oh, they haven't reported much. So I'm only looking at 5 data points over the whole month. That's incomplete data. That's not really even worth looking at. So we've got a nice tutorial that takes you through step by step on finding stations that have complete data. And that way you can put some more trust in the numbers that they've got at the end of the month. So with that, I end all my slides with these same 2, that you can get involved by getting a gauge, setting it up, putting it in a good location, and getting registered and submitting your data. We love you for that. And I finally finish by saying, we are cuckoo for CocoRa's. So thank you guys very much. I don't know if we're going to take questions now or we'll go on to the next presentation, but as I do want to make sure we're aware, I have to leave at around 1:15. So maybe if there's if we have questions that come up after that point, I'm happy to email and be involved through email to answer those questions.
Excellent. Yeah, if you have any questions, just we'll let Deb get set up for Noah about the tools that you saw today. I think it's exciting that you have some VIP data tools for CocoRa's volunteers. That's pretty neat.
I posted 2 questions for Noah, and Nicole, there was one for you from someone from Illinois who was.
Yeah, I got that. I answered her. We're got her covered. We got it.
All right. So Noah, if you want to look at my questions while I'm getting my screen shared.
Yes, and I'm not seeing the question.
Answer me now.
Do you ask what they are using as a basis?
As their basis for normal? I mean,
their basis.
You show these tools how they can get it, but do you ask them what they're using as their basis? Are they looking at those tools? Are they doing it based on their memory? And have you ever taken just a sample and looked at what they report as above or below normal versus what their gauge says against?
Sure.
I'm just curious, as a drought monitor author using the data, so.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's some times where there are, I'll actually more get a phone call and they'll say, gosh, they're putting my county in drought, and I'm telling you, I've got rain the last few weeks, and I'm wetter than normal, and so I'll encourage them to put in a report and kind of ground truth what they're seeing on the ground themselves. But
what's their normal? What are they using for normal?
no, I got you now with that.
Can you real quick stop sharing so I can start sharing?
Oh, yes, and Dr. Asino probably has that ability to do that. But no, our volunteers are using those same tools that I just showed, those prism normals, to figure out how much they should expect for their station for each month. And so they're very likely using those tools. I showed you that one from Dodge City, and he said he was behind average. They are using the tools that we just showed you, the prism estimates of your location and how much to expect. So
how confident are you in
oh, how
I'm just curious.
Oh, I got what you're saying. Yeah,
just from someone who hears from a lot of people saying we're above normal and below normal, and when I'm looking at the data and I don't see evidence of it, I'm just not saying that they're intentionally being misleading. It's
right.
Have a different thing in their mind versus what's normal and what's not. And so I always want to know, what's your perspective of normal? Are you using data, or are you living that this farm has been in your family for 80 years? And,
right.
You know, I always want to know what the story is.
Yeah, so we trust that the person is using the Prism data to figure out what's normal for them, but yeah, how do we know that they're actually using that tool? Well, we'll use the same tools like that SPI, and if the SPIs are not jiving with what that person says, now we need to just look deeper, and we have to look deeper into the data and figure out if where that person was coming up with the fact that they were an inch below average, for instance. So great question. But the bottom line is, yes, we do see it, and we just have to dig deeper into the data when we see discrepancies or just even trying to verify what someone is saying. It does take more work to verify these things.
Okay, just curious. Not trying to pick on anyone, just, you know.
No, it's absolutely right. But it just means that we typically have to dig deeper, and we do that on a weekly basis.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, oops.
No, there's one quick question for you there. Is there a cheat sheet on your website for people to be able to find somebody's information and how to find their own normal and so on?
I am going to be building some tutorials that are based on what I just showed, but for now, the best cheat sheet is probably going to be the SpottyRain site that's got all the links that I just went over. And hopefully they can review this webinar and see those tools as well. But I will be, probably by next week, I'll have some tutorials up that can also be on the SpottyRain website for people to use these tools.
Fantastic. And I've posted the link there where all the recordings are available for our website. So
yeah, I think that's a great point, to share all these tools, and then for you to be able to use them afterwards is a real challenge. I think we've tried to select tools that are usable, and then on the SpottyRain website, underneath each tool, we've tried to put the tutorials that exist or handouts. And of course, please contact us in between webinars, and we'll help you look at it, find your normal for your area. Deb, are you ready?
I think so.
Sweet, I see your slide.
Good. How many times? Fourth one in, and I'm finally getting the hang of it. So I took maybe a little bit different approach, and I titled my little mini presentation here, "Drought: a global problem with local definitions, pressures, and solutions." So before I start, I just real quick would like to have the poll question thrown up. Did you participate in the last webinar? If you're like me, it's probably all my participation is sort of on webinars. Everyone else knows that's true, don't you? When you're in webinars, unless you're presenting.
Oh,
Nobody.
they can't vote.
They can't vote. Host and panelists cannot vote.
It's disabled, yeah.
Yeah.
Nope, this is only for the special guests. I want to end the poll and show the results.
Because it would be bad if the panelists all put sort of, right?
Exactly.
Great. That's great. So then I can go really fast over my next slide. So just to look at the big picture and then take it down to the local level, globally drought affects more people than any other natural disaster. And in this period from 1970 to 2012, this is across the world, drought has caused $192 billion in damages and almost 690,000 deaths. Now, the deaths usually, those are mostly attributed to some of the big droughts in Africa in the 80s. And nowadays, deaths, we don't have a whole lot of deaths with drought in the United States, maybe mostly from heat, or maybe if there's political unrest happening at the same time. But drought affects people all over the world. And with most natural disasters or hazards, if you think about it, an earthquake is an earthquake is an earthquake, no matter where in the world you are. And I used the example of a hurricane earlier. Well, it might be called a tsunami or something else, but it's still essentially, you know, the same storm with these different pressure levels and wind speed levels and things like that. But as we talked about during the last webinar, drought is defined locally. And I'm not going to go through all of this again, but the things that make it local is, as Noah talked about, what's normal for rain is different everywhere. So drought has that comparison to what's normal, but it also has this component about a water shortage or a usage component to it. And that's different depending on who needs the water and when they need it. So that's why drought is even though it's this big global problem, it really is defined locally, and it's so unique from all of the other hazards in that standpoint. And we see pictures of some of these devastating droughts across the world. And I think as global citizens, we all have, you know, concern. When it's hard not to have concern when you see these pictures. But I think when it really hits home is when it's happening locally and when it's part of our daily experience. And so that's the purpose for, I think, this whole project, wouldn't you say? To have you as librarians help make it local, help it be part of people's everyday experience, so that as scientists, we can do a better job. You can help us tell the story and also help us get information to help find some of the solutions. So what I decided to do to make it local was to go through some of my email, and I answer hundreds of emails every year because I'm one of the authors for the Drought Monitor, just related to drought. And so we tried to pull out some that might be things that your people in your community might have. And while I'm going through these, I have a slide at the end, but I want you to think about, is there something that you always wanted to know about drought and you didn't know who to ask? Well, now you have someone to ask. So go ahead and type that in the chat box. And there is no such thing as an off-the-wall question or anything like that. So if you've got a question, ask it. And if we have time, I'll try and get you an answer on the spot or on the fly. And if not, then I'll get back to you on it. But anyways, here's a question that I had from someone who said, I'm on the board of a country club. As you can imagine, a country club is a huge consumer / waster of water. We put conservation efforts in place if our county is experiencing a drought condition. Can you tell me if we're in a drought? And I've showed the map several times, and you can see this map. It's hard to tell counties on here if you just look at this. Like, I don't even know that I could pinpoint exactly where my county is on this map. But one thing, if you do go to the website, droughtmonitor.unl.edu, and this is not live, you can click it, keep clicking in. First, it'll bring up an area, so bringing up the high plains. And then if you click on the state, then it will bring up a county and you can see the county levels. Now, I would like to see at least some cities put on this map, but we're not quite there yet. And if that's still not a fine enough resolution for you, the U.S. Drought Portal, which is drought.gov, has taken this data and they put it into this cool little tool called How is Drought Affecting Your Neighborhood? So you can enter in your community, your town and state name. You can enter in your zip code, and then you click conditions, and it will tell you what the category was at your zip code or your location on the most recent map. And then it'll give you a little weather report too, kind of what's happened over the last week. So
Cool. That was a new one for me.
and if you just go to drought.gov, I think it's, if you scroll down, it's at the very bottom of the page.
Nice.
Here's another question that I had. We're fourth grade students. We're doing a project on droughts. We're wondering if you could answer any of our questions. How can droughts be prevented? What's the right thing to do after a drought? How can drought affect the community? And how can drought affect the environment? So the first one was easy. How can droughts be prevented? Well, they can't. We can't prevent them, but we can do things to be more prepared for them. And the same with what's the right thing to do? Well, that depends on the community. That's just as drought is location specific, those solutions, or just as every drought is local, the solutions are local too. So what works for one community may not work for another, because every community is different. They have different values. They have different resources. Everything that makes your community unique is what goes into helping you cope with and recover from a drought. So to answer this question using the information, the tools that we've been focusing on in this webinar series, we have other ones to help, but specific to this, it's really looking at those effects of drought. And I think it's, as I was putting this presentation together, I guess the theme was, if you have a drought question, when in doubt, go to the U.S. Drought Monitor, because there's a lot of information on there. So once you get to that state page, and again, we're using Oklahoma as an example because I think it's one of the few states in the region that actually has some drought in it right now. If you scroll down, you can see this table here, and this is brand new. We just put this out a month or two ago. It was the results of a master's student's thesis who had been working on this for the last couple years. So, and she graduated in August, so it hasn't been out for very long. You scroll down, you see this table. Here's what it looks like bigger. This is again for Oklahoma. And to find out just in general, what are some of the types of impacts or effects of drought for your state, these are things that have showed up more than once that we've seen, and it's gone through people in the state of Oklahoma looking at it and verifying it too. But some of the things that we've seen in a past drought in Oklahoma, when drought's at that worst category, that 1 in 50-year event, you see water lines breaking, reservoir levels are nearing their intake points, water restrictions in place. It affects water quality, and even some of the rural fire departments, a lot of them are volunteer. They get overwhelmed, and because they're all volunteer and they don't have a lot of resources, and in big drought years, things like that can happen. So this is just a general overview that you can get to straight from that page. If you want more information, we do have a tool called the Drought Impact Reporter, and that's droughtreporter.unl.edu. It's not exactly the most intuitive tool, but Tanya Burnett, my partner in crime here, is a pro at this tool, and so she's, either one of us are happy to walk you through the tool if you want to find things. But there's several different ways that you can search on it, And so for this example, I just pulled up for Iowa, and all of the data that you see on those state pages came from what's archived in this tool. And so when I looked at what has happened for drought in Iowa, then you see like specific reports that have been reported over time. And so hay production, this one was interesting. Drought-stressed crops left unused fertilizer in the fields, and so they saw issues with their water quality because of drought. The fire service stopped doing training to conserve water. They had a drought, a concern hotline or mental health hotline with more people calling that. And drought tripled the number of West Nile cases. So that's something that you maybe wouldn't, people don't intuitively think. You think it's dry, so why would we have more mosquitoes? But along that line, there's more water that may be just standing around too and not flowing. And this lingering effects of the 2012 drought were being felt by Iowa Christmas tree growers. That was 2 years later, so. And for even more from the Drought Impact Reporter, we started seeing it. I don't remember when, if this was a year or so, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. What's called a story map, and it looks kind of like the CocoRa's map. Some cool things that you can do with it. It has this time-lapse thing, so you can hit play and see how the impact reports have changed, and I'm not going to go through that. You can also look at specific reports by a sector if you want to. And just like what Noah showed us, if you click on one of these, I can't even think what shape that is, diamonds, you can see the report that was actually submitted for there. Just switching gears a little bit, another type of question, so things that people care about, things that people ask and that we can help you find. Here's an example. I'm a producer at CNN trying to get some historical context on this year's drought. People always want to know that. How does this compare to? Do you have statewide data on where this drought ranks to previous years? And again, on the US Drought Monitor, we have a time series tool. We also have some other tools that are a little harder to use that I can always help with, but this shows us from when the Drought Monitor began in 2000 to the most recent map. And I'm showing for state, but you can go down to the county level to see when those drought periods were and what percentage of the state they impacted. You can also do animations and things like that as well. And let's see this one. I think this one actually came from Hawaii, but it says, I'm reporting on my state being drought-free for the first time in a long time. How did you come to that conclusion? I'm on a tight deadline for a story that airs in 4 hours. And, you know, I think they called at like 5 p.m. on a Friday or something like that. But so on the Drought Monitor, and I know I've showed this before, on that main page, if you scroll down, last week we showed how CocoRa's data was specifically mentioned in it, but each week the author goes by region and explains their changes. I picked the Midwest this time because there's something happening there on the map. And so the author says there's one category improvements in response to rainfall that boosted soil moisture, stream flow levels, and erased those deficits, those departures from normal that we see when we look over the last 2 to 3 months. And it goes on. So that's information you can get from that page, that local information. And just to promote Tanya's baby that she spent a lot of time on for information on the process and how all that data fits together, we do have this great set of tutorials that have been out for about, I don't know, 5-6 months now that just kind of walk you through the process of the US Drought Monitor. And they're just a great educational resource. And if you need anything, we have information. We're happy to share information, send information with you. And this was the question I had you guys ask. And then here are our pictures, and we are always happy to answer emails, phone calls, things like that if there's specific things to your community. And we know the tools aren't always the most user-friendly, so we are happy to help. That's what we do. So.
All right, I think that was great, Deb, because I do think people have questions and we don't always know how to find information to answer those questions. So having some real world examples, I think it's great also, you know, to be talking to some climatologists and science folks just about some of the language that scientists use that everyday people use differently, like this idea of normal and
Right.
how a scientist determines that and how we might think of it in our own places. If you have any questions for Deb, it's exciting that she is on the meeting with us. I know we had some people last time share some of their weather stories, places that they had remembered where there was drought or flood past, and I remember one from Wyoming. I just moved there. What does drought look like in my Wyoming? What does the history look like? And that drought monitor tool is really helpful for those kinds of long-term looks.
We've got another tool that's harder to use, and I would help anyone out with it or do that for them. But we have a tool called the Drought Risk Atlas, and you can go in and see, like, once you hit a certain drought level, in the past, how long is it taken for that drought level to return back to zero or back to normal? Like, how many weeks? Or how many times have a drought of a certain magnitude happened? And, you know, some cool little things like that people want to know.
Neato. Did I just share my screen or no? I turned myself off. That was the
I stopped mine.
There we go. I wanted to sort of take us back to the webpage where all the tools we talked about are here today. So Deb was just talking about the drought monitor, and there are some pretty easy ways to create these visualizations of the current drought monitor map and past drought monitor maps. I really like the slide one too, where you can see things change. She was just talking about the impact reporter, which is, those similar to the COCORAS condition reporter and the drought atlas. We've tried to put down here the tutorials that exist for doing that, and also for COCORAS, he has a little sort of cheat sheet to walk you through using some of the data, and we expect more tools. So one of the cool things is that you're on the cutting edge of participatory communication about drought, right? All of these wonderful tools are coming out from COCORAS and National Drought Mitigation Center, and you are some of the first users. I got interested in this idea when I was doing my postdoc research experience in the panhandle of Oklahoma at the height of the last drought from 2000 to 2014. So we were there and we had done research asking people about their water use and crop impacts and cattle selling and social and economic impacts of that long-term drought, and held some community meetings to share our findings. And I had discovered along the way that some of our agricultural users weren't very savvy with some of the weather and climate tools that exist. Here in Oklahoma, we have the Mesonet, which is a premier weather service. And I sat with a farmer and rancher who was still using the little widget from the local school webpage with a sun or a rain to know what was going on with his local weather. And I thought, man, that there has to be a way where we can do a better job of sharing the tremendous amount of tools that exist out there. And then when I started to search, I realized some of these tools aren't very intuitive or easy to use for an everyday person. So the ones I want to share with you today are from SCIP, and I'm going to skip here to their video tutorials page so you can see it. SCIP is the Southern Regional Climate Center, and we have a really strong drought advocate here in Oklahoma that I think makes these tools happen. You can see they have quite a few tools, and underneath them a YouTube tutorial. I wanted to talk about the normals, as Noah was talking about, in two ways. So we want to look at the average monthly precipitation and temperature for your place, and I want to take a look at this climate trends tool. And I'm going to skip
I'm
to,
going to say goodbye here. Sorry, everyone, but thank you.
yep. Bye, Noah. So we were asking about maybe what are some of the normals in my state. I'm going to choose Wyoming here. You can see you can choose your state and then drill down into your climate region. And I forget where we were, but let's pretend we're in the Bighorn. And I can choose a season. I can look at all year. I can look at seasonal spring, winter, fall, and I can look at the months. And I can choose a variable. So that I can look at the temperature or precipitation in that place. I'm gonna pop up some, some ones that I did already from my experience in the Panhandle and share how they went. So I hope that you can see this. We've got over here the blue rainfall and is the monthly total, and the red is the 30-year average. So I'm looking here in Oklahoma in Climate Division 1, which was the Panhandle, and I'm comparing 2011 to 2018. So when I was there in the summer of 2011, you can see they don't get a lot of rainfall in the Panhandle at all. So in June, maybe 3 inches. So when you don't get any, it hurts. And so you can see we were well below average. The blues are way below the reds. And if we flipped to this past July here in Oklahoma, we had, the same average, but above average rain, right? So now all the blue bars are higher than the annual average rainfall. And we can do the same for the temperature and see the temperature has been relatively consistent with the 30-year average temperature. So this is an easy tool to create and to look at. I think it's useful for farmers and ranchers to get a snapshot. Again, it's just at your climate zone, and so it's not as fine of a view as the Kokoros view, with measurements that are from your county or from your farm. And so the advantage of measuring rain is knowing that, knowing your total for your place. Oops. The next one I want to look at is the climate trends map, and we saw some of these last time in Deb's presentation. I've selected again Oklahoma and the climate division in the Panhandle and the annual, and because I want to show you something that was really significant in our discussions. So that area of the Panhandle that had been affected was the epicenter of that historical Dust Bowl drought. And so here we are looking at the annual rain in the Dust Bowl. So I think 32 was the big blow, that the dust storm, and you can see they had about, I don't know, what do you want to say, 14.5 inches of rain that year. And then we skip to the most recent drought. So when I was there in 2011 and 2014, and we can see that there was a precipitation deficit then too. And so this was sort of a question I got a lot. I mean, drought hits us and impacts us differently each time around. And a lot of folks wanted to know, is this drought as bad as the last one? And while this doesn't tell you everything, I think the Drought Monitor would tell you a better story of that. It was an easy way to sort of look at what's happened over time and to investigate with the people in our meetings, when were these drought periods that we remember, and how do they compare to each other just in precipitation? And we can also create a temperature version of that one. So I'm gonna flip back to the, I guess, to the presentation. I was in it already. All right. I'm seeing that we're 7 minutes away from 1, and so I feel like I went through that relatively fast. The skip has some great tutorials for doing that, and I encourage you to play around. And then I also encourage you to sort of share some of your thoughts on comments about the best way to introduce librarians to some of this data is. So I was excited to learn yesterday that the ALA has designated sustainability as a core value of librarianship. And so as we start to think forward about the role of librarians in projects like this, in drought monitoring or citizen science or environmental conservation and awareness, how can we connect you as data organizers, as information sharers, with the tools that will help communities make changes. So next time around, next time around, we're going to talk about some of the resources on the website and some of the ideas for programs that we've encountered from you and other people along our librarian campaign trail. I'd appreciate it if you would fill out our feedback form, this will make sure that you get credit for reviewing today, and we have some questions about technology use and access at your library because we think that might be an influence in how and if you use these tools. I also kind of want to give you a homework assignment. So we've all been flying free. The only people that have had to prepare anything are the National Drought Mitigation Center and the COCRES folks. But next time around, I'd like for you to, if you have time, to think about what are related resources that I have in my library. So if you have weather and climate books, you have citizen science books, you have historical stuff related to drought, or some of the popular books. The Worst Hardest Time, for example, is a very popular one. So we look forward to knowing what your resources are. I wanted to say thank you and encourage you to join that listserv. So I know there was a few people today that didn't get the link, and I think it's because we had just sent it to the listserv. So join the listserv so we can keep you informed about the project stuff and make sure that you're with us each day. Is there any questions from the group before we exit today in the chat box, y'all? No, it looks like we're good. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for the last webinar. We'll have more information about getting signed up to, there's a survey. Did you know that today is Friday and the beginning of the weekend? Yay! Although I think librarians work on the weekend too. I will be talking about some resources that we think might help you in your programming or make connections between the information we're sharing with you and the relevance or needs of your patrons. I am so impressed by your presence and interest in this project, and I look forward to seeing you next time.